This week, Prince Harry was set to face off against the Rupert Murdoch media empire in court. It was this long-awaited trial in London. Prince Harry's lawsuit centered on allegations that British tabloids used illegal tactics to get his personal information. The trial was supposed to start today, but then it didn't happen.
In a monumental victory today, News UK have admitted that The Sun, the flagship title for Rupert Murdoch's UK media empire, has indeed engaged in illegal practices. This represents a vindication for the hundreds of other claimants who were strong-armed into settling without being able to get to the truth of what was done to them.
That is Harry's lawyer, David Sherborne, addressing a crowd of reporters outside the High Court in London this morning. And the announcement he's making is that there will be no trial. Prince Harry and Murdoch's British media group have decided to settle for an apology and for money, an amount that's being reported as somewhere in the range of 8 figures.
News UK is finally held to account for its illegal actions and its blatant disregard for the law.
From the newsroom of The Washington Post, this is Post Reports. I'm Martine Powers. It's Wednesday, January 22nd. Today, the trial that wasn't. We're talking to reporter Sarah Ellison. She's been covering the Murdoch media empire for years. We'll hear from her about why Prince Harry was suing Murdoch's tabloid in the first place, and who actually wins in this settlement. All right, so Sarah, this was a trial that was highly anticipated. Explain to me, what was this lawsuit actually about, and what was being alleged here by Prince Harry and his lawyers?
Well, the phone hacking in general has been something that really convulsed London and the UK many years ago, sort of starting in 2009, 2010.
This week, Murdoch's senior executives are in court facing criminal charges, including conspiring to intercept voicemail messages, accused of putting themselves above the law to invade people's private lives, all for sensational stories and increased newspaper sales.
There was an original group of about 40 plaintiffs in this case, and they fell away one by one, including people like Hugh Grant and other sort of famous individuals, to the point where now, we were anticipating a trial not only of Prince Harry, but he was left with one other plaintiff, Tom Watson. And Tom Watson is a former minister of parliament who claimed that he was targeted at least 176 times in retaliation for his role investigating the Murdochs. So it was only Prince Harry and Tom Watson who were left in the end. But specifically, Prince Harry alleged that articles that were written about him between this huge range of 1996 and 2011 in The Sun and in the News of the World, which is no longer publishing, that those stories were the result of an illegal practice called blagging. And blagging
What is blagging?
Yeah, exactly. Blagging is essentially impersonating someone, pretending that you are someone you are not in order to get private information, in order to either write stories or blackmail people into giving you other information. But blagging essentially means pretending you are someone you're not, which is something that private investigators hired by these tabloids would be instructed to do. I've never successfully blagged anything, but my understanding would be you would call a doctor's office and say, "Hi, I'm so sorry to bother you. I'm, Prince Harry's assistant, and he just wanted to understand when his next appointment is, and he had lost the details of the results of his last X-ray. Could you just run over that quickly with me on the phone?" And we've heard over the years of how people have blagged their way little by little from one piece of information then to get a different piece of information. And it takes a lot of time and a lot of triangulation, but you can sort of
trick enough people to get a pretty significant amount of personal information about somebody.
Exactly. It's like one piece of information that isn't that big a deal can be used to get another one and then another one. And that is what Prince Harry was alleging.
And is this practice illegal?
Yes, it's illegal. This is something that you are certainly not supposed to do, not allowed to do. And it's not only illegal, it's clearly obviously very unethical. And it's something that for a very long time, none of the tabloids owned up to doing. When they finally did own up to it, they blamed it on a few sort of rogue reporters, a few rogue private investigators.
So this is something that Harry has been alleging happened to him, that he was a victim of this by some of Murdoch's newspapers. And just to give background for folks here, Sarah, can you just explain a little bit more about Rupert Murdoch and his media empire and who we're talking about here?
Rupert Murdoch is probably the most powerful media mogul of our generation. His family controls not only newsgroup newspapers, which now refers essentially to The Sun and the defunct News of the World, but also The Times of London, in the United States, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Post, Fox News. And his family controls these entities very much from a position of not only media power, but political power. Rupert Murdoch is someone who is conservative and was relatively close to Donald Trump. In the UK, his tabloids were incredibly influential, partly because the UK is just a sort of smaller country than the US, and his entities had an enormous amount of influence over the political life of that country for decades.
What did newsgroup newspapers of the Murdoch world, what did they say in defense?
So what Murdoch's papers have always said was that this was something that was limited to a few bad actors. When they shut down the News of the World in 2011, they sort of excised the tumor. They said, like, this was going on, but we're going to stop it. They made a big show of apologizing to their advertisers and to the victims back then, but they never admitted, and they in fact denied pretty strongly, that there was anything wrong that was happening at The Sun, which is Rupert Murdoch's flagship tabloid there, and The Sun is still very much a going concern in the UK. Because this is settled, even though Harry's lawyers are sort of crowing about their victory and the company has apologized, there's no acceptance of liability here. This is not a full sort of admission of wrongdoing.
So, Sarah, as you're describing, these are allegations that have been hashed out in court before. You mentioned these earlier trials where these accusations against these newspapers have had a chance to be aired. But it seems like things didn't entirely stick, or that, as you say, these newspapers didn't admit any widespread wrongdoing. Can you talk a little bit about why these previous trials fell short of kind of nailing the Murdoch newspapers to these allegations, and why there was some expectation that this new lawsuit by Prince Harry might be able to kind of end differently?
Well, one thing about these cases is that they involve journalists and they involve tabloid newspapers, and there are journalistic protections and source protections that are pretty serious, and it made it very difficult for the police to investigate this in the same way that they might at a different company. And at the same time, the people who were perpetrating this behavior were relatively low-level employees. What's difficult in any investigation is to determine who told whom to do what and when, and to establish a kind of broader practice. And that involves really going deep inside a company and determining who was directing which reporters to do what at a particular time. The Murdoch media empire is obviously, incredibly powerful around the world, but in the UK it was in a very specific sort of position where they had reporting and private investigators on politicians, people in the media, royals. It was sort of like all of society was bound up in the UK in this fear that the News of the World or the Sun had something on you, and if you stepped in the wrong direction, they could use it and deploy it in a way that could ruin your career or humiliate you. And so it was very difficult to get people to come forward. It was very difficult to get these allegations to stick because the Murdochs and the company have defended this incredibly aggressively over the years.
Interesting. I do think it's important to note here that for those of us at the Post, we are in some ways pretty familiar with what's going on because our current publisher, Will Lewis, worked for Murdoch's UK media group while this scandal was first unfolding, and he was named in Prince Harry's lawsuit too. Can you just describe what he was accused of?
Will Lewis was hired to work at News Group newspapers or its predecessor to help clean up this scandal and to help the Murdoch papers respond to the police investigation. What he was accused of in this particular case was an effort to delete lots and lots of emails that would have been helpful for the police investigation that was going on at the time. Will Lewis has said, quote, "Any allegations of wrongdoing are untrue," end quote. And he's been very consistent about saying he was only there to help as a crisis communicator and help interact with the police investigation that was ongoing.
All right. So coming back to this announcement today of the fact that this lawsuit between Prince Harry and News Group newspapers has reached a settlement, what do we know about that settlement? What are the terms?
So the terms of the settlement are that News Group newspapers offered a full and unequivocal apology to the Duke of Sussex. They say they're apologizing for, quote, "a serious intrusion by the Sun between 1996 and 2011 into his private life." And they're admitting that there were unlawful activities. They're also saying that this coverage had a kind of serious intrusion into his private life, as well as the private life of his mother, Diana, Princess of Wales. And so this is something that was very emotional for him. As you alluded to earlier in the episode, the settlement also came with a significant monetary award that people are reporting is in the 8-figure range, which to understand means more than $10 million. Yeah, it's a lot of zeros. It's a lot of money.
After the break, we'll hear more from Sarah about what it means that the Murdoch Media Group actually apologized. We'll be right back. Well, I want to come back to this quote-unquote full and unequivocal apology. How significant is that? I mean, does this go further than what we've seen the Murdoch Media Organization go before in terms of like admitting actual wrongdoing?
So years and years ago, the News of the World issued a major apology and shut down. But until this moment, no one has admitted that there was anything wrong at the Sun. And that's a pretty significant admission, and it shows that this was something that was much more systemic. There has not been this kind of apology or admission from the Murdochs about this particular tabloid and about these practices before. So it is a significant admission, even though it falls short of the trial that people were anticipating that was really going to draw out many more details about how all of this unfolded so many years ago.
And why do you think that this didn't end up going to trial? Do you think it was more pressure from Prince Harry or from News Group newspapers in terms of wanting to avoid a trial like this?
I think it was twofold. It was primarily an effort from News Group newspapers to avoid what could have been a very lengthy and embarrassing trial. And we also know that law enforcement officials in the UK were watching the trial very carefully to see if there was any material that was going to come out in the trial that would have been justification to reopen a police investigation. So, there was a lot of pressure for the Murdochs to not have this go to trial. At the same time, Prince Harry who had said that this was his life's mission, that he really wanted it to go to trial because he could sort of represent all of the people who had been strong-armed into settling up to this point, and there were many. Mm-hmm. He was sort of
he had the power and the standing and frankly the money to like publicly hold these people to account in terms of how he thought of it.
Exactly. There was supposed to be that he was kind of the savior who was going to come in and have the wherewithal to withstand this trial. And yet, he isn't doing that. And he's not doing that partly because in any trial, there can be embarrassing information that comes out about both sides. You know, there's been some reporting about how the way that the royals interacted with the tabloids is not something that anyone on the royal side was all that excited to make public. But there's also something about UK litigation that is different from the way things operate here in the United States, which is that if you are a plaintiff and you receive a settlement offer and you reject that, if the court awards you less than what that settlement offer was for, you are then on the hook to pay the legal fees, not only your own legal fees, but the legal fees of your opponent, which would have racked up an enormous bill for Harry. And so I think that there was a strong financial incentive to settle this as well.
Interesting. So would you say this is a win for Prince Harry, or is it more complicated than that?
An 8-figure settlement does speak volumes, but I know from my reporting that there were a lot of people who were hoping that, you know, they would have their day in court, that the truth would finally come out. And there is a sense of disappointment among some of those people that I've been talking to that there isn't going to be this full airing of all the facts of this extended practice of deception and blagging, phone hacking. These are the kinds of things that really held UK society hostage for many years. And this is, you know, this is a very large settlement, but it is not the same kind of transparency that some people were hoping for.
And Sarah, as someone who has closely covered the Murdoch family for years, I'm curious what you think this means for them and for the orbit of media executives around them.
This is sort of common practice for the Murdochs to settle almost everything that gets close to a courtroom. All companies like to settle cases. It's not just a Murdoch thing. Listeners might remember the $787.5 million settlement that Fox made with Dominion Voting Systems in 2023. That was a very significant case that promised to unearth a lot of embarrassing information about the Murdochs and didn't in the end. So I think that the people in the Murdoch empire are going to be breathing a sigh of relief, thinking that this is a line under this scandal. And at the same time, the kinds of things that might have absolved certain individuals, if what News Group Newspapers is saying is true, those are also unanswered. I mean, what we're left with is a kind of slightly unresolved story here, but I think that the Murdoch executives who were implicated in this case will be breathing a sigh of relief.
So what would you say about why this case and this settlement matters now and what it'll mean going forward, thinking beyond just the stakes that it had for Prince Harry and for the Murdochs?
I mean, some of these allegations were from so long ago that the UK press has said that it has now reformed itself and doesn't do this kind of thing anymore. And so some of this is historical, and it took years and years for this to go to trial. And so I think what you're seeing here is what you see whenever you have a settlement, which is that the press is going to say, we're reformed, we're not doing this kind of thing anymore. Prince Harry and other plaintiffs are going to feel satisfied that this company has had to pay a lot of money, but it doesn't have the same kind of instructive sort of public education that a trial can have, where people get to see really what what went on and exactly how it happened. So I think that historically, this is an outcome that draws a line under this scandal, but so much of what was at stake in this trial was decided so long ago.
Sarah, thank you so much for explaining all this.
Well, thanks for having me.
Sarah Ellison is a reporter for The Post covering media. That's it for Post Reports. Thanks for listening. Before we go, I want to remind folks about an upcoming event that I'll be doing here in D.C. It's a live podcast taping at the Apple Carnegie Library focused on the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I'll be talking with Ryan Williams from the D.C. Public Library, both about Dr. King himself, but also about the role of libraries in this moment when what you read can be seen as a political act. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. This event will be taking place at 2 p.m. on Saturday, January 25th. So if you're in D.C. and want to join us, you should sign up in advance. We'll put a link in today's show notes and at postreports.com. Today's show was produced by Sabby Robinson with help from Rennie Svirnovsky. It was mixed by Sam Baer and edited by Rena Flores. Thanks also to Bill Booth. I'm Martine Powers. We'll be back tomorrow with more stories from The Washington Post.